You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derrick, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derrick, and I am joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Guys, how are we doing tonight?
We welcome Kevin back with open arms after the technological debacle that was last week. As it turns out, when you're doing a show and 50% of the hosts doesn't have reliable internet, you might as well just not have a second host. So, but I think it's all working today. We've got the rabbit ears tuned in nicely, I believe, from where my computer is to the router in the living room. And I think, fingers crossed, we won't have the same issues that we had last week. If you were with us last week, you deserve a gold star for sticking through that one. And I'll be honest, Derrick, I didn't go back and listen to the audio version of the podcast. Yeah, because I imagine it wasn't very fun to put together, and it probably wasn't very easy to listen to. So apologies about that, but hopefully we're back on track here this week.
Right on. Well, I certainly appreciate you guys holding up the mantle for me while I was down in San Antonio for some work and a little bit of relaxation. But happy to be back. Happy to be talking football again. It's like a cocaine addict, man. I missed a week and I got to get my fix. So I'm glad to be back.
Well, that's a new one tonight. So that's fun. All right. So, alrighty, guys. So if you haven't done so already, make sure that you're hopping on the YouTube, the Twitch, hitting that follow and subscribe button. We bring this show to you live every Tuesday night, 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central. And for those of us that never get mentioned in all those things, 9 p.m. Mountain and 8 p.m. Pacific time. So lots of fun. We've got a great show for you tonight. We're talking Tennessee Titans, and the Tennessee Titans have added some intrigue going on this year. So some offseason moves have made things a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun. And it's one of those a team that when you look at it, they have been kind of the focus of a lot of folks on Twitter and a lot of folks out there on the social medias and how this is going to work and break down. And so a very fun team tonight to talk about that. The opinions vary widely on this team when you go through it. So I'm kind of excited to get in there. And unless we got anything else we want to hit up, I'm just going to take us right to the Tennessee Titans. All righty, guys. I like it. The Tennessee Titans. They're the team of the week, and that's where we're heading. And so playoff run team last year. They've got some exciting pieces, and we're going to start where we always do, and that is in the running back room. They've got a good one. You may have heard of him before. He goes by King Henry, or Derrick Henry in other circles, but he was the running back number 2 overall last year. 378 rush attempts, 2,027 yards, 17 rushing touchdowns. He managed to catch a couple of balls too. 19 receptions, 31 targets for an additional 114 through the air. Guys, your thoughts on Derrick Henry?
Before Kevin goes into it, King Henry has a soft spot in my heart because I rode that horse all the way to a fantasy football championship last year. Kevin.
Well, it's hard to follow that up. leave that bad taste in my mouth. No,
it was me that he beat.
Yeah, I know.
Also true.
I know. But as far as Derrick Henry goes, he's a top 5 back in redraft leagues, guys. Like you expect, as history tells us, that there is some regression off of a 2,000-yard season. But Derrick Henry, he's really kind of been almost like a fine wine of running backs. Like the longer he has been going, the better he's gotten. You'd like for him to catch a couple more balls, which is really going to, probably cap him at probably RB3 this season. We missed a couple big name guys going down last year, and I think that kind of helped that number 2 overall rating. But he's a guy that they use early, they use often. Darryton Evans, a guy that we'll talk about in a second. I don't see him vulturing a whole bunch and taking up that, mantle to spell him other than a couple touches per game. So the Tennessee Titans want to run the ball. That's how they're established as an offense. They set up their passing game through the run. And so that means lots and lots of Derrick Henry. So if you have your chance at him, go ahead and snag him, guys. Yes, he's not going to catch a ton of balls, but his volume on the ground and his volume inside the red zone and his ability to get inside in the end zone, really makes up for those lack of catches there. So Derrick Henry is a guy that you can draft with confidence, very safe floor, very high ceiling. We saw him go for 200 plus yards last season in a game or two. The season before that, we saw him break off monster long runs. So if you have yardage bonuses, he's capable of that too. He breaks lots of tackles. So he really is a very complete back. They just don't use him as much in the passing game as other teams use their running backs.
Yeah, I think with Henry though, he's kind of like this is so weird to say because he's kind of like an old school running back. He's a guy that they're going to hand the ball off to. They're going to ask him to run the football 25, 30 times a game, and he's going to get what he gets. Hopefully a lot of that is, some good chunk yardage plays and a couple touchdowns, or a touchdown at least a game. So it feels like, he's one of those, what we would think about if we were talking about running backs 10 years ago, like Derrick Henry would be the poster child of it. Now, the issue is that running backs are now so much more multifaceted. You've got like kind of the scat back that is Christian McCaffrey. You've got, Alvin Kamara, same mold that gets a lot of the work through the air. But with Derrick Henry, it is he will line up, 7 yards behind the quarterback, and they're just going to turn around and hand the ball off to him and try and stop it. That's what Derrick Henry is. And to Kevin's point, you're right. If you have an opportunity to get him, if you're picking, if you're picking in the third spot and say McCaffrey and Kamara, Cook, whatever, if there's two of those guys are gone, you can have confidence that Derrick Henry will be good and will take you to where you need to go, provided he stays healthy, knock on wood. And he's one of those guys that if you have a keeper league, he's worth the penalty to keep because he is that good of a player.
He's really the Alabama running back that everyone wanted for so many years, right? Eddie Lacy. This is what Eddie Lacy was tagged and projected to be. Didn't happen. Richards, the guy.
Trent Richardson. Yep.
That's right. Same thing. His rookie season started out well, like he might become this guy, and then fell off a stinking cliff and hosed fantasy owners big time that following season. But again, that type of mold, who you expect this guy to be. Najee Harris. Najee Harris is Derrick Henry, but can catch the ball better, is what everybody, that's the easy comp, right? And we'll see how he pans out and what he does in Pittsburgh. But for a long time, Alabama running backs had a bad rep, right? They come into the pros, they can't get anything done. And the first couple of years of Henry's career, remember, he was behind Dion Lewis. Like, what? WTF? Like, seriously, he was behind Dion freaking Lewis for a season there in Tennessee. Like, and they finally released the beast. And this is the, reward you get. He didn't have a whole lot of tread on his tires. So, yes, he's, I guess, in prime or slightly on the back end of prime running back age, if you're going to put a number to it. But because he split carries at Alabama, he didn't really carry the ball a whole lot his first two seasons in the NFL. Guys, I think there's a lot of tread left on these tires, and we could be seeing Derrick Henry for a good amount of time going forward, barring any sort of, fluke injury that we all hope doesn't happen, right? Because he's a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
No, you both bring up some phenomenal points and spot on, but I'm going to be the contrarian here, as is typically my role. But I'm going to ask you guys some questions here, just to see how tied into some of these things we are. So when you look at it, Derrick Henry got over a a carry mark last year with 378 touches that has proven to be a bad stat line to hit in previous years with NFL running backs, and that is 370 or more carries to it, where you can chalk it up to some of it's going to be natural regression because of the fact that there's not many times that a running back will also get that same amount of workload the following year. Now, Derrick Henry could be that guy that sees that similar workload last year to this year, and you see some of that carryover. But that's one thing that I want to know is, does that concern you at all with that 378 carries? Do you see regression coming, whether it be from him putting that many miles on the tires last year, being from the standpoint that he may not get that same kind of workload? Like, does that cause you concern at all?
If he had a different head coach, I would say yes. But I think Mike Vrabel is so committed to what they are there in Tennessee that they are going to ride Derrick Henry to wherever he takes them, right? You've got a quarterback that he's a good quarterback, but I would put him in the, I hate to do that, the manager mode, but that's kind of what Tannehill is. And Tannehill, he can win you a game with his right arm, but more often than not, that's not what he's out there to do. That could change this year with the additions that they've made. But I think that as Derrick Henry goes, so does the Tennessee Titans. And I think that is the reason that I'm not concerned that they're going to back off the workload for him. And keep in mind, we get an extra game out of him, right? We get the extra game this year. So I'm not concerned at all. I still think that Derrick Henry is going to get his, because the Tennessee Titans, in my opinion, their offensive game plan is try and stop it.
I agree with a lot of that, Alex. I think the floor for Derrick Henry is running back 7, maybe running back 8. And I'm okay with that. If I'm drafting Derrick Henry at the middle to back end of the first round, which is where you see him going, if I miss on him by 1 or 2 running back spots, but he's the guy I wanted, I'm okay with that, right? Like we've his ceiling's 2 or 3, his floor is 7 or 8. Like, that's safe, man. And if anything, you can't win a draft. You can't win a fantasy football draft with your first pick, but you can really lose it, right? Like, you can absolutely get crippled. We saw that from McCaffrey owners, from CMC owners. We saw that
Saquon,
McCaffrey, Saquon, and really Lamar Jackson last year, 2 years ago, even Patrick Mahomes, right? Because he went down with injury and missed so much time, it really crippled teams. So you're not going to win it, but you can absolutely lose that. So if I'm taking a guy who has a ceiling of being a top 2 or 3 player and the floor is still well inside the top 10, I'm going to take it, guys. I'm not going to think twice about it, because it's not only is it safe, the volume and production is there just on a plain base level platform, and I can build around that.
Okay. Another thought that I had when I was looking through this, because kind of, putting that context at 370 marker, as far as carries go, there's only been one running back in the, previous 30 years that has exceeded that, and that was Eric Dickerson all the way back in the day. Typically, you see a pretty good regression there. So I could see some regression happening with that one, just from a workload volume, to the point where I don't know you're going to see him get up there in that, but he's probably a guy that you're still going to see get 340 carries and get a ton of workload to it. And with the way that they would like to manage that game, I think you're right. I think he'll have some very good volume there. But you kind of brought up another point there, Kevin, when you were going through that, where you're talking about drafting a guy that even if you're off maybe a spot or two and you take him, but he still finishes a top 10 running back, you're happy with that. And that kind of brought up a thought from a running back we saw last year do something similar, where Ezekiel Elliott was typically the 3rd running back off the board, which is about where Derrick Henry's going drafted this year, and finished as running back 11, just outside the top 10 that you were talking about there. But if if you see a similar type of workload there and a similar type of production, are you happy with that with Derrick Henry this year?
I think, at least for me, the thing that made the Zeke ownership shares that I had last year so frustrating was it was the peaks and valleys. And you weren't quite accustomed to that from Zeke. Now, losing 4/5 of your offensive line and losing your starting quarterback don't help that, right? Like, there are natural things.
Right.
The fact that the Dallas Cowboys defense was about as strong as, a wet paper towel didn't help that. So I do think it's a little bit of apples and oranges because, Josh Jacobs, he's a guy who finished right around there too, right? And we've talked about Jacobs where he might have finished in the top 10, but the way he got there was just freaking ugly, man. Like, I can take a top 10 performance where I know the baseline, right? If I'm going to get 17 points a game, then by God, I know I'm getting 17 points a game and I can work around that. It's when your first round pick has, 28 points one week and then 8 points the next that it's hard to build a lineup around it. So give me stability, and because of how everything's situated in Tennessee, I think that's truly what you get here.
I'd also say that it's sort of an unfair comparison, as Kevin was saying, with Zeke to Henry, because Derrick Henry is and will be the offense there in Tennessee. Like, that's what they're going to do. When all of this stuff happened with Dallas last year, Zeke kind of had to become that guy, and that's not exactly what he was planning on being going into the season. And I think that's what attributed. I think he put so much pressure on himself to try and make that team go, and that's when you started seeing the fumbles and the yips fumbles that he essentially had. Yeah, I mean, he had the yips.
Holy crap.
The guy had the yips because he was putting so much pressure. I don't know this for a fact, but just logically thinking, that's what happened. That he was thrust into this position that he wasn't expecting, and he was just doing everything he could to try to help his team win. And sometimes that ended up, making him play outside of himself, and that was an issue.
And Zeke acknowledged that in week 10 or 11. Fox did an interview with him before one of the games. And Zeke acknowledged that with Dak going down, he really, felt like he needed to play outside of himself. And we see this in all sports. It's not just a football thing. It's any sport, team, or individual, that when the athlete plays outside of themselves, more mistakes happen and they actually hurt their production as opposed to help that production or that team overcome adversity. They become more of a hindrance. So
it's crazy because they got there doing what they did, right? And so when you change that, that's not what got you there. And then everything just gets thrown out of whack. So yes, I think that's kind of an unfair comparison for Zeke last year because of the situation. Whereas it's a very clearly defined what's going on in Tennessee. This is Derrick Henry's ball. And, there just might happen to be a few plays on offense where he's not scripted to get it. But it is Derrick Henry's ball to run. And he knows that. And everybody else knows that. And even the defense knows that. And they still have a hard time bringing him down and tracking him down. And I will add the other thing is, and we talked about, tread on the tires. And Kevin, you're right. His first couple years, he only had, he had 110 runs his first year, 176 his second year, and 215 in his third season. And that was his first season really as a starter, was that third year that he was in. So he's only going into his fourth year as a starter there for Tennessee. And we've seen it before, with running backs, as they get more comfortable in the league and they get more established, things the game slows down a lot and he understands what he's doing. But with the way that he's built, and this is completely contradictory to the tune I was singing a year ago, because I was really down on Derrick Henry last year, to the point where I'm pretty sure both of you had to talk me into taking him in our draft this year.
Yeah, we did.
And it turned out to be a fantastic move, obviously. But I was super down on him because I thought, well, he's not going to be able to replicate what he did, the previous year. And he exceeded that because he is 6'3" and 247 pounds. I mean, he's built like a fullback, but he has the speed of a running back and a knack for the end zone. And so while I don't know that he gets to, again, the numbers that he had last year, he's given me no reason to think that he won't at least flirt with them. So that's where I'm at with Derrick Henry. I was singing a way different tune a year ago. He has made me a believer, and I am all in on Derrick Henry.
I
Fair
think
enough.
My final point on Derrick Henry, because I know we need to move on, is I think the addition of Julio Jones really helps him because getting in that 350 to 370 range, I think that some of those carries are going to be easier carries now because they're not going to be able to stack the box as much. With Brown and Julio on the outsides, they're not going to be able to cheat in. A safety's more than likely, right? They got to be able to respect that because Julio, while he doesn't have blazing speed, is really good about getting 20 yards out and then cutting straight across the middle of the field and coming down with that ball. We saw Matt Ryan and Julio do that time and time again. And then you have A.J. Brown, who is a big body guy, but youth is on his side, and he can blaze too. So the safeties are going to have to respect both of these wide receivers a little bit more than they had to respect Corey Davis last year, even though Davis had a decent year. But they're going to naturally respect Julio more. So I do think that keeps safeties honest a little bit more. And if Ryan Tannehill can make the safeties pay for cheating up when they do, and whether it's the audible or a hard play action, and you can keep them back because you burn them once or twice, those 370 carries don't take the toll, right, that we would think a traditional 370 would, because they can't stack the box. Otherwise, they're going to get beat over the top.
Right.
I will say this. It would be crazy. 2 years ago, Derrick Henry had 16 touchdowns in 15 games. Last year, it was 17 touchdowns in 16 games. He gets 18 touchdowns in 17 games. I mean, I don't even know if there's words to describe just how good and dominant that is.
But even if he falls back and he ends up with 13 or 14, you're happy with that, right?
Like, very happy with that.
Double-digit touchdowns is just an amazing thing, regardless of where you draft a guy, because they're so hard to come by. So, hell, he falls back and he gets 12 in 17 games. That's still going to be better than 95% of the rest of the league, if not.
Well, apparently the internet bug bit Kevin right there. So I'm sure Kevin will be back in. But while we're waiting, real quick, just want to give some shout outs to, I'm not sure if that's Ike or Elke Azar, but welcome in to the show. Appreciate that. And you're right. Zeke is definitely somebody that we've talked about in the past. Looks like JP Kennedy 2121 is also joining us again. Good to see you.
PJ Kennedy, your dyslexia is wrecking.
Well, I'm sorry, PJ Kennedy 2121. I got it right that time. Yes, I would agree with you that the Titans are going to be filthy. Welcome back. Enjoy seeing you in the comments as always there. Kevin, any final thoughts there on before your internet decided to go all wonky?
No, my hot take broke the StreamYard. I'm done.
See, that's the problem. We keep doing this. We get going on these rants, and then all of a sudden, StreamYard's like, nah, nope.
Yeah. That hot take was too hot. We broke the internet. Oh, fine. All right.
All right. Next.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you guys. I do have Derrick Henry. Like I said, I was going a little contrary in there, but I've still got him running the ball about almost 1,600 yards and about 15 touchdowns. What I've got him projected. So he is going to have
1,600.
Yeah,
wow.
Only.
Haterade.
Wow, that's less than 100 a game. I mean, the dude averaged 123 last year.
I hear you.
Haterade.
Did you not hear my whole thing about regression?
Excuse me.
Did you not hear my whole thing about regression? He'll have some regression there. That's where it's coming to play. But I think he'll still have a very, very good season. Obviously, top 10. And I've got to prescribe to your methods as what you guys were prescribing there. So Darryton Evans is a rookie that they drafted going into last year. Didn't see much last year with only 14 rushing attempts. Had 2 receptions on 4 targets. Any thoughts on Darryton Evans?
So typically when we talk about a backup running back, it's in kind of that handcuff, especially in a feature back, which there are very few of those still remaining. There's the feature back role. But, I think if Derrick Henry gets hurt, and we don't want that to happen, but if he gets hurt, I think this offense might change a little bit. And I don't think they would be so focused on the run. I think they would rely a little bit more on Tannehill with those two toys that he's got on either side of him. So I don't know that Darrington Evans, he wouldn't be, he's not Derrick Henry, right? And we can all agree to that. And I don't think that they would even try to utilize him in the same way that they utilize Derrick Henry. So for me, Darrington Evans is like a deep bench play that I probably wouldn't even pay attention to. Because for me in this Titans running back room, it is Derrick Henry or it is nobody.
No, I was digesting that, Alex. Darryton Evans is the guy that I am drafting solely as a as a Derrick Henry, Mark Henry, the world's strongest man. There you go. Some WWE plugs for you guys there. He's solely a Derrick Henry handcuff. So Darrington Evans is a guy that you can get pretty late, 14th, 15th round, something like that. Like he's not going super high. So he's a guy that I am going to take as the handcuff. I think, we'll talk about Brian Hill in just a second. They brought him in as an insurance. I think that he's more of a pass blocking insurance than anything else. They had a lot of really good things to say about Darrington Evans all throughout last year. It was just, why play him when Derrick Henry's rushing for 2,000 plus yards in a season? So he's a guy that I'll take as the handcuff, and I can get him super cheap, where it's really just keeping him on the roster and keep him buried. God forbid anything happen, but that's the only purpose. If I don't have Henry, I'm not going to tie up Darrington Evans. Like it's not worth the wait and see, just because Henry's health record is so impeccable.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I don't know that I've got anything really to add there. Go ahead.
I would say this. I tried to employ a strategy last year, maybe the year before. I can't remember right offhand, but I tried to employ the strategy of drafting handcuffs for guys that I did not have on my team. So my example is I drafted Alexander Mattison because I thought that Mattison might be able to have some standalone value by himself, but he would really have value if Dalvin Cook ever went down. And Dalvin Cook kind of has the track record of not playing a full season. And then I thought, well, I could draft these guys and then maybe flip them to the guy who needs him if that running back goes down. Do not employ that strategy. It does not work.
What you're describing works really well in a best ball situation type of deal where you're throwing those late round dart throw type of things. And if somebody goes down, you go that way. But no, you're right. With what you're talking about, that strategy, it works really, really well if you've put them in as a, piece of candy on top of the trade type of thing. A little bit of trade fodder on top of it where it's, not the deal, but it's an ancillary piece to improve the deal overall for that. And Ike Azar was saying that the volume in Tennessee has increased year over year since Vrabel took over. The defense has regressed a little bit. Last year they ran about 7 more plays per game than they did in either 2019 or 2018. They still are a run first team. The ratios were 51-49. So yes, definitely a run first team. They do like just plugging and chugging the ball because that will also help that defense out there as well. But I think some of that too had to do with the fact that you saw a lot of teams play faster last year, just simply from the standpoint that there wasn't some of the crowd noise. There wasn't some of that kind of stuff going on. So it was able to speed the game along. You're able to get, I think the average was each game and each team saw a couple more plays run on a per game basis than they had in the previous couple of seasons. And I think the crowd stadium and some of that had to do with some of that too.
That's an excellent point because these offenses didn't have to go to a silent count or anything. I mean, they could hear each other in the huddle just fine. They didn't have to, hand signals or anything to get plays called. So That's a very good point, that I think defenses weren't able to tee off as much as they wanted to last year. So offenses was going to thrive. Hopefully everybody will be back to at least somewhat capacity stadium. I think the plan is right now that most teams will be at full capacity this fall. So I would see that number come back down to the median versus last year's exception to the rule.
Yeah. Well, guys, let's go ahead and Brian Hill, newly coming over from the Falcons as well in the offseason. Any desire to talk about Brian Hill in this running back room?
So here's my one thing about Brian Hill. The Falcons didn't re-sign Todd Gurley. They brought in Cordell Patterson. They let go of Ito Smith and Brian Hill, and they think they're fine. Like, that's what they think of Brian Hill. Oh, we brought in Cordell Patterson, let go of Todd Gurley, let go of Ito Smith, and we still don't need you. Like, they think of him that much. So I don't have great expectations. He can pass block fairly well. Like, I really think that it's the insurance policy. Maybe spell Henry on some obvious passing downs, so that way he's not taking any of those extra hits from the linebackers that aren't necessary. But I don't see him with any great role on this team. I think his snap count's probably going to be somewhere around, maybe 13%.
Okay. That's probably pretty fair there. That's about what I think I've got it projected as well. So let's go ahead, unless Alex, you've got any thoughts on Brian Hill. All right, let's go ahead and talk on the wide receiver room. We'll go ahead and move over there. And the Titans made that a little interesting this year, bringing in, making a trade, that kind of stuff. We'll talk about Julio next, but we're going to start with A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown finished as the wide receiver 11 last year, 70 receptions, 106 targets, 1,075 yards for 11 touchdowns. Any thoughts on A.J. Brown?
A.J. Brown could be the best wide receiver in the league from a fantasy standpoint if he received the volume that a Nuke Hopkins or Devontae Adams or hell, even Tyreek Hill get. His biggest downfall is the fact that he's on a run-first team, but the guy is electric. He had some nagging calf, I believe it was a calf injury last year, if I'm not mistaken, that kind of kept him on and off the field for a little bit. But when he's on, he produced. And Ryan Tannehill looks to him first and looks to him often. We'll see if that trend continues with Julio by his side. But much like with Derrick Henry, I think Julio does help with that because they're not going to be able to roll the safety over the top on A.J. Brown all game long, and he's not going to have to fight through some of that. So the opposing defenses are going to be forced into maybe a little bit more zone coverage last year, or if they're going into a base man coverage, they're not going to be able to rotate over on him at all times. So I think he cracks the top 10 this year, guys. I do see that happening with that extra game, his ability, the pressure off with Julio there to take some attention away from him. I see his targets increasing somewhere in that neighborhood of, around 120 between the extra game and just some natural uptick, call it 85 to 88 catches. So I like A.J. Brown a lot. And realistically, I wish I had more shares of him. I think at times I just kind of get scared because he's on a run-first team. But if you're just looking at the numbers and the usage that the Tennessee Titans put on him, he's a very good wide receiver to have on your team, and I think he will finish top 10.
Yeah, I like what you had to say there about if he had the same usage as some of these other guys, and I think you're right on that. He's just on a run first team, and that is to no fault of his own. There's sometimes when guys get put into situations, and this was a team that drafted him, so like he understands. I mean, obviously he's okay with it. It's all he knows because he's only played 2 years, and those were Derrick Henry's 2 best years as an NFL player. So I think he understands that his role and his position on the team. I tend to agree with you, Kevin, about the uptick in terms of the targets, the receptions. What I really like about him, though, is that you can pretty much rely in the 2 years that we've seen him now. You can pretty much guarantee you're going to get 1,000 yards and you're going to be around that 10 touchdown mark, right? Like that's pretty good. And when we were talking about the consistency of drafting a player, and when like, hey, I'm going to get some solid production out of this guy, and there's going to be, I think, with any wide receiver, just week to week, there's peaks and valleys, with the exception of maybe Devontae Adams last year. I think that you're going to be okay with that. I was looking up his ADP here, and Derrick, if you've got it.
6. Right now, he's the wide receiver 6 off the board. Overall, 21.3, so call it the 21st pick off the board. So you're taking him late second, 6th overall was wide receiver coming off the board.
That feels right to me. And I think he might even, that might be a bit of a value if that's where he's at. Because I haven't gone through receivers yet, so give me a break. But that feels like, with the addition of Julio, and I know that Julio is going to eat into it, but they had Corey Davis last year. I still think that feels about the right spot for me.
Alrighty. So for me, Kevin, you kind of alluded to it already and hit it pretty close to how I had him statted out there. I think he's a guy that's going to see over 1,300 yards receiving. I think he's going to hit probably that double-digit touchdown mark on roughly something in the mid-80s as far as receptions go. So that's kind of how I see A.J. Brown playing there. I think I've got him up there right at about 130 targets. So very similar to what you were saying. But A.J. Brown is a guy that's very interesting because he is a one-touch type of receiver. He's a guy that can take a quick slant over the middle. Ryan Tannehill can hit him, and he can either run over somebody or run away from somebody, which is not something that you typically see out there with a lot of these NFL wide receivers. He's a big enough body wide receiver that he can make a contested catch, but also very interesting from the standpoint that he's got the speed just to blow by people. It's funny too. Like you think about how big of a body he is. We just talked about DK Metcalf last week when we talked about the Seattle Seahawks, and going into the draft, both of those guys coming out of the same school, Ole Miss, being in the wide receiver room over there, and you saw some of the draft photos and all that. How much smaller, A.J. Brown looked standing next to DK Metcalf. But so he is absolutely a huge, huge wide receiver. Can be a top, he can be a top 5 finish, but I don't necessarily know that it's one that I'm subscribing to put in as a top 5 guy on any of my rosters there. So Alex, when you're talking about putting him as a, maybe a value as the 6th wide receiver off the board, I think that's about where that's very consistent where you'll be able to get him. For me, he won't end up on my roster simply from the standpoint of how I typically draft. I like to go running back early on. And if I'm going to go with a wide receiver there, I want a wide receiver that's going to see north of 150 targets. I want a pure volume-based wide receiver as my wide receiver 1. And with the fact that Julio's there, I think that does limit. That is not going. I don't think it will. It will limit the upside that he has as far as being a volume-based receiver. I think Julio there opens things up a little bit more for him to have big play potential, and you'll see some more of those breakaway plays. But from a 150 target volume, I don't see that happening. And so that's, for me, it's a little too rich for my blood as a late second round wide receiver 6 overall type of ADP.
Okay, so around him in this rankings that I'm looking at, which of these 3 would you rather have? And you are taking a wide receiver. To throw your draft strategy out the window, you are taking a wide receiver in the second round, in the 20 to 23 range. You have to take one of these 3. Who would you rather have? Ridley, Brown, or Jefferson?
Ridley. Without thinking about it, Ridley. You also forgot DK Metcalf goes slightly above him there too.
Yeah, Metcalf he's in the 15 range. I'm in the 20 to 25 range.
Yeah, Metcalf right now is the ADP 18, AJ Brown 21. Ridley's right there at 23, which is kind of crazy to think about. I'll take Ridley all day. I'll take the number one wide receiver on that team in a pass-happy offense that's going to have to be playing from behind all day, every day. And so, yeah, give me a guy. Like I just said, I want a wide receiver. If I'm going to take one there, I want a wide receiver that's going to see 150 targets with the subtraction of Julio out of that Atlanta offense. I think you absolutely see Ridley get over 150 targets this year. So, yeah, that's a smash the yes button and away I go.
I'm going to go Jefferson.
Hmm.
I like the idea of Ridley, but what we've seen out of Ridley in the last couple of years is there is a week or two each season where the guy just forgets he's playing football. Like, and right, wrong, it's the consistency. Like, that really, really hurts your fantasy team when you're trotting this guy out as presumably your number one receiver. If you're subscribing to, any, running back, wide receiver, fill in the blank in the third round that's not a wide receiver, right? So he's going in as presumably your wide receiver one. For him to take a goose egg hurts big time. Now, I'm not saying Jefferson's going to duplicate what he did last year, but it's a team that has a shaky defense. Yeah, they'd like to be run first, but Kirk Cousins still manages to find a way to finish at quarterback 12 every single freaking
yards.
year, right? And that's got to go somewhere. So, I guess I'll take the guy who Kirk Cousins has done it for a little bit longer than Ryan Tannehill. They both have a older, wily veteran by their side in Thielen or Julio. But at the end of the day, I like the idea that they're playing in a dome, for a good portion of their games. Yes, they have to go to Green Bay and Chicago, but overall, they get half the games in their dome. I'll take a flyer on Jefferson. I don't have many shares of him, so I think that kind of adds into it. Is I don't have a whole lot of Jefferson, so if those are the three guys, I'll take a stab at him. What the hell?
Fair enough. I just don't see. I see Minnesota's defense being markedly improved this year, and them settling back into just running the football, playing behind a defense, and going through it that way. Atlanta didn't make enough moves in the offseason to improve that defense, and they're going to have to try and win games 40-42 type of thing. So that's where I see it. I'll take the offense that's going to put up 40 points over the offense that I think is going to put up about 25 type of points there. Just the passing volume, I see it more so for Ridley than I do Jefferson this year. So, Alex, any other thoughts there?
You sound like you've been, drinking Lake Superior water up there in Duluth with the defense is going to be better. Like that is the Minnesota Viking fan rallying cry year in and year out. The defense will be better this year.
Fair enough. I actually saw them make moves in the offseason to try and bring players in to be better on the defensive side of the ball. So I did not see Atlanta do that. So
I tell you, I think I would take I think I would take AJ Brown. So we're split completely on this. I think I would take AJ Brown because, and this is the I think it's an addition by subtraction, and that's a weird way to put this. But I think with Julio leaving Atlanta, it's really going to hinder Ridley because you don't have to respect the other side. I mean, Russell Gage is serviceable, right? But you're not going to have to respect the other side. You don't have to worry about where 11 is on the field because you don't want to get beat by 11. So to me, which he's not 11 anymore, I think he made the Carson Wentz switch to number 2. But to me, I like AJ Brown because of the addition of Julio Jones. Because it's going to take attention away from him a little bit more. And Jefferson, I think, is, 1 year is 1 year. Prove it to me again.
Fair enough. I just kind of come back to the standpoint, too, that when you look at Ridley, he had a couple of finishes as the number one overall wide receiver on a couple of weeks, and those weeks were weeks that Julio missed. So, it's one of those that they, Julio's taken focus off of that side of the field. the weeks that Julio wasn't there, Calvin Ridley put up a couple of wide receiver 1 overall weeks. So you could be right, and it could be the fact that that they aren't necessarily as strong over there. But we'll see how that one comes to play. Let's go ahead and move on over and talk about Julio Jones, though, who had a bit of a disappointing season last year, injury type of season. I'm sorry, a health-resistant type of season there. He finished as the 53rd wide receiver, 51 receptions, 68 targets, 771 yards for 3 touchdowns. Your thoughts on Julio?
It's so weird to talk about Julio Jones and not the Atlanta Falcons.
Yes. Yes.
This does feel a little weird. Now, what wouldn't it just be, right, just NFL fodder if Julio Jones trots out there and has his typical, well, I shouldn't say typical, but gets 80 receptions and 9 touchdowns, and people are going, well, why the hell couldn't you get in the end zone in Atlanta, right? Like, that was the biggest thing about Julio, is between the 20s, he was the guy to have. But once you got in the red zone, there's a lot of guys I'd rather have than Julio Jones. Like, it just never fell his way. So I do think it's going to be a little bit interesting. I like Julio. The health scares me, guys. It really does. And I just don't think that on a run first team, I'm going to be targeting the number 2 wide receiver in the 5th round. Like, that just doesn't sound comfortable to me. Now, will he own up to that draft value? Quite possibly. Like, I'm not saying that he's not going to, but as far as my comfort level with taking my 2nd wide receiver, essentially, who is the number 2 wide receiver on a run first team, the equation doesn't add up for my draft strategy. So that being said, I do think he's going to see a lot of targets as well. I do think he's going to see more than his fair share of receptions, and his ability to play on the opposite side of AJ Brown. So yes, there is value there. The health thing does concern me. Maybe playing on grass helps him. That turf in Atlanta, right? So maybe the turf was, banging him up and causing the hamstring injuries. Like, not being a SES major, I can't speak to that. I'm not a doctor, but all the things that could possibly help out. But God, guys, I just don't think I can draft him in the 5th. I think I'm just looking at other places and at other people in the 5th round where I can still get number 1 options on teams, right? I can still get a Kenny Golladay. I can still get a Cortland Sutton. I can still get, you're looking in the 5th. Hell, you can still grab one of the Cowboys receivers. I'd rather have the 2nd option for the Cowboys, right? In a range of that. So it's just depending on your play style. Keenan Allen's available in the 5th in Superflex leagues. I mean, hell, we grabbed him up there a ton this off season because everyone's so focused in on quarterback and running back. There's a ton of wide receiver value right there. I don't think you need to reach for Julio Jones at that point. Now, if he falls to the 7th or 8th, for whatever reason, if he falls to that, yeah, I'll scoop him up, take a flyer on him, because then most likely he's going to be my 3rd wide receiver, a flex play, something like that. But as my number 2 guy, I just don't want the number 2 on a run first team.
So I think when you're evaluating Julio Jones, there's like, the little devil and the little angel that comes up when you're thinking about him, right? There's like the little devil that's like, he only played 9 games last year, and he's coming off of an injury, an injury-plagued season, and this isn't some sprightly young chicken. This is a guy going into year 11. And then there's the little angel that's like, yeah, but he's really motivated to get back at his old team for the way that he was treated, and he's got some new life breathed into him because he's on a new team. And then there's the little devil that's like, yeah, but it's Ryan Tannehill, and they've got AJ Brown, and they've got Derrick Henry. And then there's the little angel that's like, it's Julio freaking Jones, man. Like, why would you not at least consider this. So, like, that's kind of the process that goes on, I think, when you're evaluating Julio Jones this year. I'm not 100% sold on him. The devil's point about he's going to and he's coming from a pretty injury-plagued season. That guy's shouting a little bit louder than the little angel that's saying he's on a new team and he's motivated to do stuff. So that, to me, it is a cause for concern. And I don't know what his health situation is. From what I've seen from some of the reports, dude looks fine, looks good, and looks like he's ready to go tear it up in a new situation. But that is cause for concern for me, and it will give me pause that if he's not at the absolute right spot when you're picking and when you're drafting, then it is not worth it to me.
I very much agree with everything that y'all just said. Julio, I was looking it up, actually right now is the ADP 38 off the board. So that puts him at the 402 in most rounds. And interesting enough, when you look at some of the names coming off the board after him, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, CeeDee Lamb, Robert Woods. There's a lot of receivers out there that I think I would honestly probably take over them.
That's a classic case of what Kevin was talking about, that wide receiver 2 on a different team. And Adam Thielen is a perfect example. While I don't think he is the wide receiver 2, I think he's still the top show there in Minnesota. But, I think a lot of people, after what Jefferson did, are viewing him that way. I would rather go Thielen than I think I would rather go to Julio Jones. And I hope he makes me eat crow, because it's kind of guy that you root for in a new situation. But
yeah, I think you could see it where Julio does have a bit of a bounce back, right? The narrative streak going on there with the some of the revenge and some of that kind of stuff. I think that all plays in there, and I think the fact that the fact that they can't necessarily just key out on there, and you can't have a couple of double high safeties over there over the top on the cornerbacks, because of the fact you've got a guy named Derrick Henry running up the middle will help open things up there a little bit for him. The fact that he's not necessarily, the way that we're expecting this to look isn't necessarily going to be the first read on that option, may also open some things up there as well, because previously Julio always drew the top corner assignment from the opposing team, and now he's probably going to see the second best corner on that. So you could see some things open up there, but no, the health resistant issues that he had last year do worry me a little bit there. But I think he could have a little bit of a bounce back and some value, but not where he's being drafted at right now. Guys, any desire to talk about Josh Reynolds or any of the other Titans wide receivers?
On a consistent basis, I don't think any of the rest of them have anything.
Yeah, I'd agree. Reynolds had some intrigue until the trade happened when Julio came over, and as soon as Julio landed in Tennessee, Reynolds went bye-bye as far as any sort of fantasy relevance on my radar. Now, I think he's probably going to get drafted, right? Like he's a guy that a lot of guys will pick up as kind of late flyers, and Julio can't stay healthy, so I might pick this guy up in like the 14th, 15th round, and then he'll kind of assert himself into that wide receiver 2 role for that team. But at that point, I think there's probably some youth that I'd rather look at and a couple different creative options as opposed to Josh Reynolds.
Fair enough. Well, let's go ahead and move on over to the tight end room. And Anthony Firkser finished as the tight end 30 last year, 39 receptions, 53 targets, 387 yards, and 1 touchdown. Your thoughts on Anthony Firkser?
He's a guy that, it's been changing a little bit lately, but there for a while, he was so far buried on tight end depth charts and preseason rankings that if you were playing with a group of guys just going off of rankings, you could grab Anthony Firkser in like the 19th, 21st round. And just, if nothing else, sit on that. Now, they've come out and said that he's not guaranteed necessarily that tight end 1 role, which has kind of put a pause to some things too. So it's a little bit of buyer beware, trying to figure out what they're going to do with that offense, right? Like there's definitely, I don't know that there's enough volume to truly support 3 mouths. Now, it's his usage, right? He's a stream tight end for sure. Like anybody outside the top, 5-6 guys, realistically, you should be streaming tight ends anyway. But he's a guy, you play the matchup, you see what it's looking like. Maybe you catch him on a good week. Maybe he's a guy that you plug in if the matchup is right. If your main guy has a bye, right? If you have a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce or something like that. But I'm waiting. I'm waiting on tight end. Like, if nothing else, like if I'm not dead set on going Travis Kelce or Darren Waller or George Kittle, if I'm not absolutely hell-bent on grabbing one of those 3 guys, I am waiting a long, long time for tight end. Like, I like my teams better when I draft it like that. I'm comfortable streaming tight ends and looking at matchups on a week-to-week basis. And it's just something that I've done over the years and feel like I've been pretty damn successful with. So I'm not going to change it. And I'm definitely not going to change it for a run first team and a guy who's playing tight end for them.
Yeah, you'd think with a run first team, the tight end would be a little bit more involved in the passing game because just the way that, how those teams work. Typically tight ends would be able to see a little bit more open field, especially if the safeties are going to cheat. But the problem is they've got those weapons that are weapons. They've got AJ Brown and now they've got Julio Jones in the passing game. With Firkser, I mean, again, tight ends are so tight ends that aren't named Kelce, Kittle, or now Waller are so touchdown dependent. And for him to have 3 career touchdowns in 3 years, I'll pass.
He's no Delaney Walker. This is not the same Tennessee team from, 4 years ago, right? Where
Correct.
They didn't really have any weapons on the outside, but they had a decent run game. The defense was meh, so. And so you could count on Delaney Walker going rough shot. It wasn't even the same. Jonnu Smith didn't even see that, and he's a better tight end, right? We saw him. He got paid, went to New
far
England.
More athletic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's not overly appealing. And he's nothing that I don't feel like I can get from a number of different teams when I'm waiting that far.
Right. And that's kind of how I see it too. When you look at the fact that Jonnu Smith was a guy that, he saw a couple of targets on a per game basis, but it wasn't necessarily enough to really sustain you and really make you happy that you were playing him. Where Jonnu Smith really shined was the fact that was when AJ Brown missed those games at the beginning of the year, and that's where you saw the volume go to Jonnu Smith. And so I bring all of that up because, Narrative Street and looking at what that looks like going forward. Well, they've got a guy named Julio Jones. They got a guy named AJ Brown that both are appearing to be healthy heading into the season. And that's where the targets are going to go in this passing game. The tight end is going to be an afterthought on this one. And it's going to be maybe a check down type of maneuver for it. And that's where, Anthony Firkser may have some values is a tight end, touchdown dependent type of tight end that falls in the end zone a couple of times. And if you pick the right week, it may have some impact, like last year when you picked him and he finished as the tight end 1 because he fell in the end zone and had a pretty good game in the absence of Jonnu Smith. But yeah, not a guy that I'm actively seeking to go out there. He could very well be a good late addition, late add type of thing. If everybody else is gone, punt the position and pick him up. That might be worth it to start my streaming realm there. Any desire to talk about Geoff Swaim, who's also in the tight end room?
He's a blocker.
All righty, let's go ahead and talk about Ryan Tannehill, who finished as a quarterback number 7 last year, 315 completions, 481 attempts, 3,819 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He also put a little bit of work on the ground with an additional 266 and 7 on the ground. So your thoughts on Ryan Tannehill?
For me personally, I'm not going to speak for the rest of the room here, but for me personally, I always seem to forget about the work that Ryan Tannehill can do with his legs and how that does help create a safer floor for him. It was just, look at my quarterback rankings and kind of, tweaking around with those before the show. And I have him at quarterback 12. Now, I still feel pretty comfortable with him at QB 12. But it does lead to, all right, so what are the reasons why he fell, right? Like, what are we expecting more of? Part of it's the resurgence of Joe Burrow, and kind of, I think he's going to sneak inside the top 10. I think that Lamar Jackson's going to have a bounce back, more of a bounce back season, right? And kind of get inside of that level, which is going to push him down a spot. I think that Tom Brady is going to be lights out in his second season in Bruce's offense, right? Traditionally, quarterbacks go bonkers in year 2. So I think Tom Brady's a guy that can do things like that. I think Matt Stafford can give him a run at tight end 11 or 12 just because of what they're able to do in LA with the Rams, and having a quarterback that likes to throw downfield a little bit more. So he's a guy you can really get as like your second quarterback in a super flex. If you want to grab your 2 quarterbacks early, you can grab him as your second quarterback and feel really, really good about that, guys. Like, he will put up numbers. Obviously, he can use his legs. He has extra weapons to play with. The Titans, even though they like to run first, it does create safeties cheating up, so he's able to hit some of those deep plays to A.J. Brown or now Julio Jones. So it's not that I don't like Ryan Tannehill. I think he just gets lost in the wash sometimes. But he is a very valid and very serviceable option to go, top 12 as far as quarterbacks being drafted. And you should feel pretty confident about that if you're building around him appropriately on your fantasy roster.
Yep. Dur Sharp chiming in on YouTube says that he sees Tannehill as a borderline steal, but more of a streamer than a weekly start.
That's probably
that's kind of how
fair.
He's been played, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how he's been played the last couple seasons. And towards the tail end, you realize, holy shit, like this guy's strung together a couple really good weeks. Like, let's go ahead and throw him in again. And you end up riding him for a little while. So I'd agree with that. I think that's kind of the stigma around him. But if you wait on quarterback, especially in a single quarterback league, if you're waiting on quarterback, he's not a bad guy to target.
Yeah, so I was going through and doing my positional rankings, and Kevin, you're absolutely right. I've got him at 13, and that's really not a knock on him, but I think other guys take steps that get him, that push him down. It's not that he regresses so much; it's just that other guys will do so much better that they will pass him by in the rankings. So that's where I've got Tannehill is at 13. That all could change because I didn't rank Deshaun Watson when I did those rankings because I don't know what is going to happen with Deshaun Watson. I kind of just left him out. So yeah.
If he sits up, I'll rank him. But until then,
right.
I didn't rank him.
But some of that still could change. But I've got him at 13 right now, and it's not a knock on him now that he's got some other weapons. But again, they're going to run the football there, and in an offense where it was 51 run, 49 pass. That balance, it just doesn't really intrigue me too much. That's funny. Yeah, you really do. It doesn't intrigue me too much.
Go ahead, finish, and then I'll
it just doesn't intrigue me too much because for a quarterback, I want somebody who's going to, if they're not going to be a blazing runner, I want somebody who's going to throw the football a little bit more. And has a few more options. We just got done saying that they don't really have a tight end to throw to, and so that just limits kind of the options that they have when it comes to throwing the football. So I think, again, the way that he is used is that second quarterback, and I think you'll be happy with him. He'll put up decent numbers when it's all said and done. It's not going to be blow you out of the water type numbers, and I don't see him cracking the top 10 this year.
Yeah. So to go off of, oh shoot, sorry guys, hit the wrong button.
Derrick Sharp.
Derrick Sharp's comment. I think he's right, but they have a lot of juicy matchups just in that division, right? The Houston Texans are probably the worst team in football. without Deshaun Watson. Like, they really are. So you get them twice. You have this Jacksonville Jaguars team that who really knows how good they're going to be under Urban Meyer, but they've really been tinkering on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll see how the defense kind of plays in there. But on top of that, as I'm kind of flipping through the schedule, right, you have the Chiefs game, which is going to be a shootout. So I kind of like them for that Chiefs game. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then, oh my gosh, I just dropped my. Sorry, guys, just screwed up and it just dropped everything. I apologize. They have a game against the Cardinals as well. And so just to kind of highlight some of those juicy matchups, right? High scoring affairs. You have your two divisional bottom feeders, and then you have the Chiefs, you have the Cardinals. Like, so there's 6 games right off the bat. So you have a third of the season that you feel comfortable starting him. And then you probably have a third of the season where you don't want to start him at all, right? 2 games against the Colts. Maybe the home game you start him and the road game you don't, but they play the Niners too. So I don't know that I want to play him against the Niners. I don't know that I want to play him against the Rams. So yeah, you have some of those games where maybe not so much. So there are juicy starts in their schedule to have. So to that point, yeah, pick them up. Especially, like I said, especially in single quarterback, right? Where you can play that matchup a bit more in single. Super flex, you're kind of stuck, right? Because most teams, you're not getting 3 quality quarterbacks in a super flex league. You can get 2, and the third one's just kind of a reach in case, Dak Prescott breaks his leg and then you're stuck scrambling for the rest of the season. Yep, that's me. But outside of that, there's enough matchups there to make it worth your while.
Yeah, well, and you talk about too how much the rankings and the ADP have risen for Ryan Tannehill from this time last year, right? When you look at it going into 2019, looking into 2020, he was the quarterback 20 coming off the board. This year right now he's the quarterback 13, so definitely puts him in that very strong quarterback 2 type of ranking for me. But it's interesting too, because when you look at the games, kind of going back to Der Sharp's comment that you want the juicy starts. Well, the juicy starts for Ryan Tannehill mirror 2 other players having good games out there, and one of them being Derrick Henry. So when you look at that beginning part of the season, right, Ryan Tannehill didn't have a great start to the season. Neither did Derrick Henry have an overly great start, but you start looking about week 11 for both of those guys, they explode, where Derrick Henry is kind of transforms and puts up weeks number 3, number 1, number 1, number 4, number 2 on the week as far as running back finishes go. Well, Ryan Tannehill mirrored that with 6, 9, 4, 3, 5 type of thing. So when Derrick Henry does well and they have that established run game going and really pounding that ball and working that thing, well, that just opens things up and how Ryan Tannehill thrives and succeeds in this offense, where he's able to go up and over the top. They're able to run some of those play actions. That's where Ryan Tannehill does really well, is that play action pass where they're able to fake that ball to Derrick Henry. And then you've got AJ Brown being able to sneak up and over the top and run by somebody, and Tannehill hitting him on the run, and away he goes. It's off to the races. And so it's interesting how those 3 really kind of have this codependence upon each other to have good fantasy weeks, where it's not necessarily what you see in a lot of teams where, if 1 or 2 of these guys has a good week, that typically means the third guy's not having a great week. But those 3 guys in there, when they have really good weeks, they all tend to have really good weeks. And when 1 or 2 of them struggles, they tend to struggle together.
Yeah. So I got my phone to work. My knock on Ryan Tannehill is his schedule going down the stretch and into the playoffs. So they have at New England in week 12, which you're winding down the regular season. Week 13, they're on a bye. That's typically going to be the last week of your regular season. Maybe week 14, depending on how you're set up. So 14, you have the Jaguars at home, so you feel good about that one. But for
juicy matchup.
Yep, your quarterfinal and your semifinal, though, at Pittsburgh and home against San Francisco. Like, those are tough playoff matchups to have going in. Again, looking at a single QB league where you can kind of get out of that and move around a little bit. And then week 17 is at home against the Dolphins, which could quite possibly be that could be a wild card play-in game. Honestly, like the way those teams are set up, I expect the Colts to win the South, and I expect the Bills to win the East. But we're adding in that extra wild card team. Only one team per conference is getting the bye again. So those guys could play each other in week 17, and then quite possibly have to turn around and play each other again in the wild card round in week 19. Technically, right, the wild card weekend. So that might be the one knock is throughout some of those juicy matchups. I don't like his schedule going down the stretch and into the playoffs. So it might be something where you try and look to see if you can get some key matchups on him, and maybe you're able to flip him if he's your second quarterback for a team who has an injury, or they don't like the fact that Trevor Lawrence didn't pan out or something like that. And you can kind of get something out of it right at the trade deadline.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on there. Well, guys, any final thoughts on the Titans?
Not fun team, right? It has tons of fantasy value. So
yeah.
I mean, definitely
it's a playoff team, right? So there's going to be good pieces, right?
Yeah, there's some pieces to have.
There's good pieces there,
and really one in every level, right? You could go for the run game early if you want a Derrick Henry. The receiving game early, right? If you want AJ Brown, and then kind of that mid-tier level quarterback, if you want to wait on quarterback a little bit and go Ryan Tannehill. So there's definitely value there. They should be a fun team to watch. They're going to play in a division it should be a 2-team race. It should be the Colts and the Titans, and just kind of see how those two battle it out down the stretch. So I expect them to be knocking on the playoff doors once again. So they'll be relevant all season long.
Absolutely. Well, guys, let's go ahead and
also not fantasy related. I do like I was going to say I like the right tackle that they drafted this year. Dylan Radins, North Dakota State. Go ahead.
There you go. Gotta plug those North Dakota State guys any chance you get. I like it. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and move on over. We've got a fun little topic that we're going to talk about, right? Like some of that when you're talking some of the draft strategy out there, and when we talk to handcuffing some guys, stacking some players, that kind of stuff. So we're going to explore this here a little bit. And when we're talking stacks, that's the strategy tonight. And so, we've gone through some of these things in the past where you're talking, would you stack this guy? Would you handcuff this guy? That kind of stuff. And that's where we're going to expand that out a little bit. And so the question is, what players are you stacking from the same team? You can have a 2-player stack. And then if you go with a 3-player stack, which can happen out there, does that change the team? And who would your 3-player stack be? So who's your 2-player stack? Who's your 3-player stack?
Before we get going, I want to make sure that I did the exercise correctly. Here's a little peek behind the curtain for everybody that I probably should have brought this up before we went live with the show. Did I do the exercise correctly?
You've got 2, but I'm still waiting for your 3-player stack from the same team.
Okay, go ahead.
All righty. Kevin, would you like to lead us off?
Sure, I'll kick it off. I think that I think there's definitely some low-hanging fruit here, and I'm going to go ahead and take it, and then I can expand later on. But I do think that depending on the setup, right, and going from there, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs is a really fun stack. You get the rushing out of Allen. And then obviously the passing and receiving totals between Allen and Diggs. So I think between those two players, you really cover a large majority of what this Buffalo offense does. I think one that maybe isn't quite as thought of, but one that I think I can get a lot of value out of based off when I'm drafting these guys is a Michael Thomas, Jameis Winston stack. I think that's one that people aren't quite thinking of, and you can get a lot of value. Now, going to the 3-person, if I'm going Jameis Winston, Michael Thomas, I can get Alvin Kamara, and that's actually a reasonable, like when you think of how your draft board falls, you can get all those 3 guys and have a reasonable stack that you can actually put together. The unreasonable one is Dak, Zeke, and CD Lamb would be my unrealistic stack, right? Because all three of those
Things
guys
would
are
have to
going in.
happen.
Yeah, all three of those guys are going in the top 4 rounds. So that one's a little bit unrealistic. But as far as what can actually happen, I'd take a Kamara, Michael Thomas, Winston. I could also follow that up with a Jonathan Taylor, Carson Wentz, and Michael Pittman. And Pittman's probably the oddball out, right? Like, wide receiver 2, but for best ball purposes, right, which is where you're really trying to stack guys like that, that's something that you could absolutely do in a best ball and really hit those high weeks and be pretty damn happy with yourself.
Absolutely.
Wow.
All right, Alex.
I'm really glad you didn't take any of the ones that I had, which I think is very interesting.
You had them written down, dude. I wouldn't. I mean,
okay.
You had them in the show. Yeah, you had them in the show, Doc.
I was going to
steal it out from under you.
All right. So for the 2-player stacks, which I think are pretty reasonable to get, like these are all, fairly reasonable. You'd have to have some things fall your way. But the first stack that I like is in Seattle with Russ and DK. And I don't know. I don't think you could do it. All right. Thanks, Kevin. I don't think you could do it with getting Tyler Lockett in. So I think that the 3 or Chris Carson, I think that the 3-person stack out of Seattle, I just don't think is feasible. But I do think that you could get DK and you could get Russ. I think that's plausible. And I really like that stack. Even with a new OC for what is this? Russ is like 15th year, and he's had 17 different OCs. I think there's still something going on there. So I'd take that one. Also, another plausible one is in Green Bay with Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. I still think people are very far down on Rodgers, and the dude turned in an MVP season last year. Take all of his off the field stuff away. He's just a different cat. And I still think though, when it comes time to put the helmet on and go between the lines, like he's still Aaron Rodgers. So Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams is a stack that I'm pretty interested in and is fairly reasonable. A fun one that I think could have some interesting results. And I don't know that it would be possible to do just because of where people's opinions are on all of these players, especially the first 2. But the fun one for the 3-person stack is a Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, DJ Chark. That one would be a ton of fun. And I don't know that you could get Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne in the same draft. You think you could?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, you'd probably draft Lawrence a round or 2 earlier than maybe what you want to, but you can make that happen.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a fun one that I think would have a ton of intrigue. And if nothing else, there would be some fun weeks. There will be some awful weeks, but there would be some fun weeks with those 3.
Yeah. Alex, that's kind of the mid-round stack. Like that's what you're talking about there with your 3. That's just the mid-round stack. Like that's the value stack type of thing.
I think the one of yours that could be fun is if you added Chris Carson to your Seattle stack. And that's something you could actually do in single QB leagues, right? You get Metcalf in the 2nd, you can get Carson in the 3rd, which is where he's going right now, and then follow it up in the 5th and get Russell Wilson or the 6th in single QB formats, and you can have a fun Seattle stack right there too.
And before your signal cut out, I'm not sure that you could get Lockett in there, but with Carson, you probably could make that happen.
If you're at the turn, you might be able to.
Yeah. Got a turn. Yeah, you're right.
But Lockett's a best ball guy. Like I don't want him season long. I want him best ball format. I want the 3 games that he's going to blow up and cause him to be a top 10 wide receiver on the season because of 2 games. Like I want him for that purpose. I don't want to play the season long thing of do I start him or do I not start him this week? So, But interesting deal there. Some low-hanging fruit for me on the 2-player stack would be Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins. Kind of the same thought process that you were given when you were talking about Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. Kyler's going to give you some rushing upside, going to give you a rushing floor. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be that 150-plus target guy year in, year out. It would not surprise me to see him finish as the wide receiver number 1 overall this year for fantasy. I could see that one happening there as well. So love that stack. If I'm looking for, a little bit more of a value type of 2-player stack, one that I'm absolutely loving right now is a Matthew Stafford and Robert Woods stack. A guy that, Robert Woods, you can typically pick up 4th, 5th round type of thing. And Matt Stafford is a late round quarterback that you can get. So a lot of value that you can pick up there. If I'm going with the 3-player stack, we just got done talking about it and kind of gave the my analyst there what I'm saying. If all 3 of these guys have if 1 or 2 of these guys have a good game, typically all 3 are going to have a great game. And so I'll go with the AJ Brown, Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill stack, which you could potentially pull off there. Granted, AJ Brown may have to fall a couple of picks in that second round to get him back to you, but that is one that you could pull off. Type of thing. I just don't know that you're necessarily comfortable taking running back, wide receiver, same team, round 1, round 2. But that could be a lot of fun there as well.
Here's a fun one I just thought of: Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen.
Yep.
Like that could be a fun one. And we didn't even touch on the Chiefs, right? Obviously the Chiefs are a fun stack, right? Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey or Tyreek, and then if you like CEH and think he's going to kind of bounce back from a rookie season that disappointed some fantasy owners, like that's fun too. Like there's a lot of very fun, very intriguing 3-player stacks that are quite reasonable in single quarterback formats. Once you put super flex in, it's a little bit harder because of where some of these guys go and everything else. But single quarterback formats where guys typically can wait on quarterback and you can draft your skill positions first and everything else, there's a lot of interesting 3-player stacks that you could do that make it interesting, right? And some people don't like it because you put too many eggs in one team's basket. But one of the funnest fantasy football teams I had was damn near, a decade ago. Maybe even more than that, because I had Andre Johnson, Arian Foster, and the year Matt Schaub went bonanza in Houston. And that was a fun 3-player stack. And honestly, I was still a little newer in my fantasy football life, and I just kind of drafted the guys that were coming to me at the time. But it ended up riding me I think, to the finals. I don't think I won it that year, but it was fun to play all season long because it was the one season Matt Schaub actually did what he was supposed to do.
Absolutely. So, just kind of a, overall side note kind of deal. Now we've kind of gone through that. Is this a strategy that you actively like employing with your fantasy rosters? And it's something that you seek out trying to do?
I guess not necessarily actively seek out. I think depending on the team, you always have guys in the back of your head like, hey, this is a prolific offense, or hey, this is the first option on this team. Even if it's not necessarily prolific, you know that the floor is a little bit safe, or if it's a guy that you can snag late, maybe he's the deep ball threat, especially in best ball, right? Like you can get that stack going and kind of get their home run hitter and try and do it that way. But when I'm coming into a draft, I'm thinking value. I'm thinking some guys that I'd like to have on my team, some guys that I think will be underdrafted, that I can kind of wait on, or some guys that maybe if I know I like him and I think he's going to have a big season, maybe I grab him, around early just to make sure I get him on my team. I'm not thinking stack so much, but as it is in football, right, we all gravitate towards these high profile offenses. So if you can get 2 pieces of the Chiefs offense, you feel really good about your fantasy team. And maybe that's by design. Hell, maybe it's because it fell to you, right? You're drafting at the back end of the first round, so you're able to get Tyreek. Then you have the turnaround in the second like, hey, well, what the hell? If I want Mahomes and he didn't go, I'm not going to get a chance by the time the third round comes around in a single QB. So I'll grab Mahomes here. And then in the third, maybe then you get CEH, right? And you can naturally build that stack that way. So my advice is don't force it. It's not worth it in redraft leagues. There's a ton of options in best ball. You want to play off of that a little bit more. But in redraft leagues, don't force the stack. There's just too many options and too many things that you're trying to do throughout the season when you have to move guys in and out of lineups and play matchups with certain positions a bit more. But they're fun as hell to have. Keep you invested in what's going on.
I find myself asking the question when I'm about to draft is, do I have somebody from this team already on my roster? And it's a question that I ask myself every time. So to your point, Derrick, stacking is not something that I typically seek out. If it's two guys that I really, really want, then absolutely. But on the most, as a general rule for me, I try to diversify as much as possible when it comes to my fantasy football, because if one team has a bad week, then your team has a bad week. So that's kind of the strategy that I've always looked to employ, is just keep in mind how many guys from one team I have on the roster from whatever team.
Very cool. I like it. Kevin, real quick before we get to final thoughts, Alex and I had a question come in last week while you were gone, and we're going to just get your quick thoughts on it. Viewer was wanting to know, who do you take? And the reason we got to ask you is because Alex and I couldn't come to a consensus. So who do you take it's a rookie draft PPR, Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle?
I think I don't know if there's a right answer for that. I don't love either one of their landing spots, right? Like, that was the biggest problem with this class of rookies, is it's not that these guys aren't talented. They are. I didn't love some of the landing spots and some of the guys throwing the ball to these receivers. So, I mean, gun to my head, have to pick one. I'm probably going to go Devontae Smith, just because Waddle screams more scat back or scat receiver to me at the time. And yes, that's how this league is kind of trending with the Tyreek Hill mimics, if you will. But God, he's got to be the clear number one right now in Philly. And anytime I can get a clear number one, I'll take my shot on him. So Devontae Smith.
Gotcha. So that brings the consensus to Devonta Smith. There we go. Well, guys.
I got booted out. Did he agree with me?
No, he agreed with me. I took Devonta Smith. Alex was the Jalen Waddle side. And we both gave some pretty good arguments and some pretty good explanations as to our reasoning behind that. So
I have a lot of shares of both. Through all the rookie drafts I did, I do. I have a good amount of shares of both. So I feel like I'm covered. If one has great success in the NFL and one doesn't, okay, so be it. But I wasn't necessarily searching out one guy or the other guy.
Right. So, all righty, guys. Well, I do believe that that's going to take us down to the end of it. Any final thoughts for the listeners?
Do your homework. We're getting close in, so we're a little bit of slow news, but at this point, just pay attention. Keep up on the injury reports and a lot of coach speak going on. But if you guys have a good local beat writer who can give some good, honest feedback on what has been going on at the team facility, listen in on that. Being here in Denver, Philip Lindsay a couple years ago, undrafted free agent that they brought in, and all the beat writers were just saying how he popped, how he just kept popping and showing up on the field. And so he's a guy that maybe didn't go in your rookie draft, or maybe he's a guy that if you're just in a redraft league that you can just, put a little star next to and check up on him once a week. It's nothing that you need to look at daily, but just keep an eye on and get a feel for, a player or two that you think will have some success that maybe no one's talking about, and just do a little bit of homework on them while we have time in this slow period here in the NFL cycle.
I can't tell if Alex is with us or not.
Nah, he's having some issues. Go ahead.
All righty. Well, guys, I do believe that that's going to wrap up yet another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Do us a favor. Hop over there on the YouTube, click the subscribe button, hit the like button, give us some comments, all that good stuff. We are doing this show live every Tuesday night at 11 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you tune in. We really enjoy you guys giving some chats and giving some comments. And it really makes the show a lot more fun when y'all are chiming in and giving us some pointers and some tips. Yes.
Alex's final thought. He texted and said his internet was given out. He wanted to give a congratulations and kudos to Demaryius Thomas, who is retiring as a Denver Bronco. Wanted to thank him for the fun years in Denver and wish him better luck on being able to hold on to things like household appliances better than he held on to footballs certain seasons in Denver.
There we go. So I like the look there.
Is it working?
It's working. Kevin just gave a very poignant, eloquent speech about your thoughts on Demaryius Thomas retiring as a Bronco today. So
hey, we had some fun, and he came in during the Tebow years, so like he lived through it with us, and it was fun to be a Broncos fan again. So that was fun.
Absolutely.
Tip of the cap to Demaryius Thomas.
Love it. Guys, that's going to wrap up yet another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, click the subscribe button on the YouTube. You can follow us on our socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, at Good Old Boys FF. Really enjoy hearing from you guys there. We've also got the website, Good Old Boys FF. The rankings will be hitting those soon. Starting next week, we're going to start revealing some of our positional rankings. We've got some great guests lined up for you. Don't miss any episodes. We look forward to talking with you. And I'm Derrick for Kevin and Alex. Have a great one.